The hearing officer would like to observe Michael MATTEUCCI.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael MATTEUCCI. I am the Regional Director of Contracts and Administration for the U.S. Rail Operating Subsidiaries of Canadian National Railway Company, which celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2019. CN's core value is operating a safe and reliable rail transportation network. I am responsible for CN's U.S. Passenger Rail Group. My team works on a daily basis with Amtrak to provide strong performance under our operating agreement with Amtrak. In the U.S., CN hosts portions of 6 Amtrak services shown in the attached map: 14 trains a day in Illinois, 8 trains a day in Michigan, and 2 trains a day between Chicago and New Orleans. In dispatching these Amtrak trains, CN gives Amtrak the highest priority on CN's single-track network, higher than CN's own freight trains. CN appreciates FRA's hard work in the developing proposed rules and engaging with stakeholders last fall. CN welcomes this opportunity to participate in today's public hearing by conference call to discuss its perspective on the FRA's proposed rule regarding Amtrak metrics and standards to implement Section 207 of PREA. CN plans to file written comments on June 1, expanding on its views and proposing specific changes to the proposed rule. CN supports adoption of a single on-time performance metric and standard for measuring Amtrak train performance. However, for customer OTP or any other OTP standard to be a meaningful metric and fulfill the statutory goal that it act as a screen for trains subject to potential Service Transportation Board investigation, it must be applied against schedules that are designed to work with that single OTP metric and that are reasonably achievable. The proposed rule recognizes that only 10 of 45 services met the 80% customer OTP standard during the last 2 quarters of 2019. That means that 35 of those services, which could represent perhaps 150 to 200 individual train schedules, may require changes, lengthening, reallocation of a recovery time, or both, to have reasonable chance of meeting the new proposed minimum operating standard. The proposed rule appropriately recognizes that the recovery time in many schedules must be reallocated for customer OTP. But FRA's decision does not account for the fact that many Amtrak schedules have not been thoroughly reviewed and updated for decades, despite profound changes over time, and may need to be lengthened in order to make 80% customer OTP reasonably achievable. Amtrak services on CN illustrate these points. Schedules for many of these trains, such as the 10 trains per day on the Lincoln and Texas Eagle services that operate between Joliet and Chicago, may require little or no change on the CN portion of the schedule to make customer OTP reasonably achievable. Other train schedules, such as the 8 trains that operate on the Blue Water and Wolverine services, may require only redistribution of recovery time to meet the new customer OTP metric. Finally, some train schedules, such as the 6 trains that operate on the Illini, Saluki, and City of New Orleans services, will likely require both redistribution of recovery time and other updating and lengthening. Indeed, Amtrak's own conductors on these last 2 services frequently report that they have failed to meet scheduled arrival times because of, quote, insufficient runtime, end quote, in the schedule. And that's another way of saying that the current schedules are too short and need to be lengthened. It should come as no surprise that there is a broad need to modify Amtrak schedules in order to make application of the customer OTP standard meaningful. Hosts have had no occasion to modify schedules for the customer OTP measure, and in any event, they have not had the necessary data to do so. Customer OTP was not one of the original metrics or standards adopted by FRA and Amtrak in 2010, and it is not a metric or standard under Amtrak host operating agreements. Further, Amtrak collects and controls the ridership data required to modify schedules for customer OTP, and Amtrak does not publish that data and has declined CN's request to provide it. Given the critical need to modify many of Amtrak's schedules in order for the customer OTP standard to be meaningful, CN wishes to highlight two major concerns regarding the proposed rule. Our first concern is that the proposed rule does not require that schedules be updated and modified as necessary to make the customer OTP standard reasonably achievable before the new standard applies. It is useful that FRA has provided a minimum 3-month window before the new standards begin to take effect, but the proposed rule suggests no solid process or basis to assure that the necessary changes to schedules will occur during that time. 3, 2, 1. When the 2010 metrics and standards were adopted by FRA and Amtrak, application of all the station's OTP metric was deferred for 2 years, but many Amtrak schedules were not updated during that period. Based on that experience, FRA should recognize it cannot reasonably assume that necessary schedule changes will be made prior to application of its new standard unless it fashions its rules to provide the necessary incentives and means to assure it happens. FRA should require hosts and Amtrak to jointly certify that a schedule is achievable under the customer OTP metric and standard before it is applied to it. To avoid potential impasse and delay, disagreements between the hosts and Amtrak related to the certification process could be resolved through arbitration under Amtrak host operating agreements or through another binding dispute resolution process that may be specified by the FRA. Further, schedules not identified by a host or Amtrak as requiring modifications by a date certainly could be treated as automatically certified. In order to facilitate preparation of our comments and timely schedule review, it is also critically important that Amtrak be required under the rule to immediately provide hosts with the detailed ridership data they need to analyze current schedules and necessary adjustments. The second concern we wish to highlight today is with respect to the train schedule principles set out in the proposed rule. For several reasons, we urge the FRA to significantly modify those principles. First, while the principles appropriately recognize the need for reallocating recovery time, they fail to recognize the need to analyze and modify existing schedules to address other issues, such as inadequate total runtime. Present schedules should be subject to testing against objective measures and actual operating history to assess whether and what adjustments and length are necessary. This can be achieved objectively and efficiently using data such as past arrival times, delay data, and train performance calculator results. Second, as noticed in the proposed rule, processes and procedures for schedule adjustments are already covered by individual agreements. The principles not only conflict with those procedures and processes, they create unreasonable and unnecessary hurdles and burdens with respect to future schedule changes. For example, the principles would require the proponent of a future schedule change to support that change with extensive dispatching replay files and operations data and analysis. These are highly time-consuming and burdensome requirements that are not needed to support schedule changes. Third, it is unnecessary and inappropriate for FRA to attempt to enumerate generic principles to govern future schedule adjustments. FRA guidance is appropriate to address the immediate need to modify schedules to adjust the FRA's new 80% customer OTP standard. However, once that initial modification is in place, the parties will have a sound baseline and a mutually understood benchmark against which to evaluate future schedule adjustments, which can be negotiated consistent with their individual agreements. Moreover, for purposes of a Section 213 proceeding, issues such as how many parties have addressed schedule issues and the data and information that might be required to litigate such a proceeding can best be addressed to the Surface Transportation Board on a case-by-case basis in the context of individual proceedings. Again, I want to thank FRA for holding this hearing so that CN could present its views on FRA's proposed rule. CN hopes that you and your families are all staying healthy. Thank you for your time.
Next up, the hearing would like to recognize Jim Matthews.
Hello, and a special thank you to Mr. Lastighi and his team for your effort to move forward with this hearing despite the limitations imposed by the COVID pandemic. We hope you and yours are safe and well. At Rail Passengers, we believe that publishing these proposed metrics and minimum standards for Intercity Passenger Rail Service after endless litigation and delays is an important milestone. Tens of millions of people in hundreds of American communities have been waiting for more than a decade to see this moment. Passengers have a right to be on time, and the proposed rule, while not perfect, gets us all that much closer to getting there. We are the oldest and largest organization speaking for more than 40 million Americans who rely on trains of all kinds. Our tens of thousands of members work every day for more trains, better trains, and stronger infrastructure. This makes communities safer, more accessible, and more productive, and it improves the lives of everyone who works and lives in small towns and big cities all across America. It's an exciting time to consider rail's future. It's even more exciting now that all stakeholders, rail passengers, Amtrak, commuter operators, shippers, and yes, Class 1 host railroads have clear, unambiguous standards to move forward. Our association welcomes the opportunity to provide public comments on the proposed rule. As you know, we met with the FRA and Amtrak last summer and fall to share passengers' own ideas on how these standards might take shape. So we were especially pleased to see that the proposed rule indicates a single, easy to understand, on-time standard that's framed from the point of view of paying passengers. In addition, we strongly endorse the publication of quarterly reports on customer service performance in important areas such as cleanliness and food service. It's also an important step forward to report financial performance measured and published against both the pre-required affordable cost standard and the existing fully allocated cost methodology. These represent real improvements over the status quo, and we look forward to working with the FRA and Amtrak to see these standards reflected in the passenger's experience. At the same time, we also believe that an even more bold approach could yield real improvements, not only for passengers, but for railroading as a whole. Rail passengers believe this already excellent proposed rule can be strengthened in the following ways. 1. Incorporate even more transparency on elements of passenger operations and performance. 2. Enhance customer surveys to recognize and include the disabled, the elderly, special needs, and rural passengers. 3. Include additional metrics to evaluate the customer experience without relying on a survey score, such as the number and rate of mishandled bags, customers not receiving booked service, customer complaints, and metrics associated with those requiring ADA accommodations. And 4. Broaden and strengthen the assessment of public benefits to include the effects of economic contributions to served communities, network and multiplier effect, the financial contributions and connections, and the effect of degraded on-time performance on connections. Public benefits should also be assessed using per passenger mile and per departure calculations to better understand the value and contributions of particular routes. We've included detailed section-by-section recommendations on these items in our written comments filed to this docket on April 22nd, and we urge FRA to consider these changes for incorporation into the final rule. We know that late trains are the single most significant cause of passenger dissatisfaction, but rail passengers would also like to state, for the record, that the customer OTP standard benefits everyone, not just Amtrak passengers. Our association recognizes that late trains stem from a complex mix of causes. However, another crucial piece of the puzzle is the lack of capacity, along with the industry's increasing adoption of precision railroading. Shippers have already testified at length before the Surface Transportation Board about the degree to which precision railroading has turned out to be anything but. Rail passengers believe that the proposed rule will encourage more disciplined operations for host railroads, promoting fluidity, speed, and reliability for all users. We all want a fluid and reliable railroad. Commuters, shippers, and end-use customers deserve nothing less. While we're sympathetic to the host railroad's challenges, the fact remains that our members rely on and pay for timely and regular service on those routes, whether riding as an Amtrak passenger or as a daily commuter on systems across the country like Metro or MARC. It should be obvious, but it bears repeating. Late trains interact with other trains, so it follows that passenger improvements can benefit all operations: freight, intercity, passenger rail, and commuter. Consider this example from Texas. Amtrak's Texas Eagle, operating for just 30 of its 1,300 route miles on tracks between Dallas and Fort Worth, owned and dispatched by commuter operator Trinity Rail Express. Delayed on host railroads hundreds of miles away, the Eagle routinely arrives on TRE territory late. In March, the Eagle reached TRE territory on schedule only 8% of the time. This ripples throughout the system, delaying TRE passengers as well as Amtrak Eagle passengers. Insisting that trains run at least close to on time is not a recipe for degrading service. The assertion that schedules have not been changed in decades is misleading, because many schedules have been changed repeatedly. And the suggestion that many current schedules are just too hard to maintain is belied by reality. On-time performance was much better before 2013, when the federal court action suspended performance metrics, and it improved again when certain railroads had a bright public light put on them last year. Experience in the past 5 years shows that the Class 1's consequences matter more than the schedule. To underscore a point we made in our written comments, the proposed rule provides the mechanism for adjusting schedules, but no requirement that all sides approach that task in the spirit of goodwill. As written, Amtrak and Class 1 hosts could well file perfunctory requests and responses to each other and then head straight to the STB or even federal court. After more than a decade of litigation, we at Rail Passengers want to say strongly that we hope everyone will negotiate in good faith and work to adjust recovery time without simply extending schedules, so that trains run even less competitively than they do today. Going straight into yet another round of litigation can't be the answer. Working together using the principle that FRA outlined in its preamble to this rule is the right way forward. And if FRA has to take the step of requiring, in regulation, that the parties must make good faith efforts, then so be it. To conclude, modern passenger rail and fixed guideway mass transit can carry large numbers of people longer and faster and more efficiently than ever before. Americans recognize this and increasingly demand more trains, faster trains, and better rail infrastructure. Clear, customer-focused standards set the stage to make our train service better and more useful across America. Rail Passengers strongly supports the new metrics and standards and would object strongly to any effort by any party to dilute them. We hope all the stakeholders can work together to make this important rule work well for the long haul. My staff and I remain available for further questions, meetings, or follow-up. Thank you for this opportunity to share our views.